Hello, it's Aram here at the ANCA headquarters in Washington, D.C. It is a slow week in our nation's capital. It's actually unseasonably warm as well. And as we wrap up the year, as we wrap up 2019, look ahead to 2020, I thought I would actually look back at some of the goals we set for ourselves earlier this year, in January of this year. A lot of these are outlined in a blueprint we published called ANCA 360. You can follow it on one of the links that I posted on our on the description of this video. It's called simply anca.org/ANCA360, and in that we went through all of our policy priorities and what we've done, what our objectives are, and what our specific policy priorities or aims are as well. And that falls in the category of Artsakh, Armenian Genocide, US-Armenia relations, U.S. policy on Turkey. And of course, helping young Armenians, find jobs here in D.C. to be better trained advocates for our cause. So it covers like the 360, as you might imagine, so the full waterfront of ANCA issues. So I thought I'd do that right now. I'm going to also open up our Facebook page on my desktop here and refresh that. And if you have questions along the way or concerns or suggestions, please post them there. I'll do my best to kind of toggle back and forth to see if I can answer those questions as well. And so let me start right at the beginning, as I say. Let me go here. 1 second here. Okay, I'm looking back and forth. Okay, I have it muted so there's no feedback. Okay, let's look at, I think, probably the most the part of our agenda that's gotten the most press this year, which is the Armenian Genocide. We started the year, and if you look at the ANCA 360 document, it'll spell this out with some pretty basic goals. It's essentially to move America away from denial toward honest recognition, and then ultimately a pivot toward a constructive U.S. policy that moves Turkey toward justice, that ends Turkey's obstruction of justice for this crime. That's our long-term goal. And along the way, the two specific policy priorities that we had for this 12-month period were, number one, getting the Congress to override Turkey's veto on recognition of the Armenian Genocide, and second, to get the White House to do the same. Okay, I can say that 2/3 of it, done, check. We're not there yet with the White House, although I do think the White House finds itself in a relatively untenable situation, which I'll get to in a second. So let's review that. So this year, against the backdrop of high tensions in the U.S.-Turkey relationship, Erdogan's purchase of Russian aircraft missiles, his general undermining of U.S. interests and allies in the Middle East, we advanced very aggressively our two pieces of legislation. Now, as I've mentioned this before in previous videos, but we started on the House side, knowing that Speaker Pelosi, Majority Leader Hoyer, and Minority Leader McCarthy and others, and plus all these committee chairs that have been friends of ours for years, were extremely well positioned to pass the Armenian Genocide resolution, authored by Adam Schiff and his co-author Gus Bilrakis, a Democrat and Republican. So we went to the process, very confident that Speaker Pelosi and her colleagues would move this issue forward, and in fact they did. What was a bit of a surprise was that the vote was not 55-45, wasn't even 75-25. It was 405-11, and that was a very powerful outcome that I think really speaks to something that we've said for decades, which is give us a vote, give us a chance, get the resolution to the floor, and it'll pass overwhelmingly. We won 405-11, and that's against the backdrop of Turkey, really misbehaving. But there's still a huge overwhelming majority that would have passed it 5, 10, 20 years ago. And it's regrettable that it took this long, but we're happy that it happened. And certainly the strong vote in the House is exactly what led to the success in the Senate, because our strategy went from seeking a political victory, a majority victory on the Senate side, to a unanimous consent strategy, which was basically, there was just a handful of people, just 11 out of the entire House, who could vote against who found themselves able to vote against the Armenian Genocide resolution. Shame on them. But there were only 11, and the message in the Senate, delivered very powerfully by Senators Menendez and Cruz, was listen, who among the 100 senators would stand in the way of the adoption of this resolution? Now, it did take 4 weeks, 4 separate unanimous consent requests actually over a period of 5 weeks because you had the Thanksgiving break. But once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th time, nobody stepped up and sorry, phone's ringing. Nobody stepped up to block the measure, and in the end, it passed. It passed by a vote of 100-0, unanimous consent request. And again, so what we did here was strong vote in the House side, set the stage for a unanimous adoption on the Senate side, which in turn puts the White House essentially on its back foot. This is a situation where the president is the last surviving, the last sole remaining enforcer of Turkey's gag rule here in Washington, D.C. And that's very obvious to everyone because everybody, Democrats, Republicans, essentially 95% of legislators of his own party don't want to enforce this gag rule anymore, and in fact rejected it outright in an overwhelming display of bipartisan support. And now the president's out there and he looks like he's just carrying Erdogan's water. It comes across as very much a Turkey first policy. If this was America first, we just tell the truth. That would be the American policy. But we have a situation where it's a Turkish policy. I've said it before. I will say it again. A policy set in Ankara, exported to Washington, enforced by presidents. In this particular case, by President Trump. I don't think it's where he wants to be. I don't think the White House wants to come across as, essentially carrying water, an errand boy for Recep Erdogan. I don't think that's sustainable, but we're going to see. And we're going to apply maximum pressure in the coming weeks and months. Certainly April 24th is a milestone, but we like to see action well before then. So that's where we are on the genocide issue. We set the goal, ending U.S. complicity in Ankara's denials. We got the House 405-11. We got the Senate 100-0, and now we're working on the White House. When that is done, we will start pivoting the ship. We will move the U.S. policy. It's a big turn, but we'll make that turn. Not in the direction of denial, not in the service of obstruction of justice, but rather in the pursuit of justice. Getting Turkey to end its denials, and then enabling a situation where Turkey, post-denial, sits down with Armenian stakeholders in Yerevan and the diaspora and says, this is a crime, this is not a conflict, this is a crime with a perpetrator and a victim. The consequences of that crime have been borne 100% on the shoulders of the Armenian people for a century now. Now the perpetrator needs to bear the consequences of that crime as well. We need to look at the elements of viability that were stolen, that were denied the Armenian people over the last century, the opportunity costs for those crimes, the return of land and churches and properties and assets, and those things that will essentially make the victim whole. This is a extremely common idea in human civilization, the idea of making the victim whole, that you return what can be returned and that you compensate for what cannot be returned. This is all we ask. We ask for justice, nothing more, but nothing less. That's where we are on the genocide issue. Artsakh, boy, a lot of stuff went on in Artsakh this year, and I think outside of the fall of this year, probably the bulk of our advocacy efforts on the Hill, especially, dealt with Artsakh and protecting Artsakh and supporting Artsakh self-determination. So I wrote down my notes here because they're kind of detailed. Let's first look at aid. We have sustained and supported U.S. aid to Artsakh for basically 20 years, more than 20 years. We pushed that back in 97, got it put into the fiscal year 98 foreign aid bill, and I've defended it every year, sustained it every year, to the point where now tens of millions of dollars have gone to Artsakh for maternal health care, for clean drinking water, and currently for demining, life-saving demining activity. This year, we heard rumblings from the administration, ultimately a formal notification from USAID that they were cutting off demining assistance to Artsakh. Now, that came across as an ill-advised decision. The money that will be saved is nominal, but it's a major investment in peace, and actually withdrawing it or cutting it sends all the wrong signals to Azerbaijan. It emboldens Azerbaijan to be more aggressive, and it helps and creates questions on the Armenian side about why would we leave this work undone? Why would we leave mines in the ground when it's well within our ability to make Artsakh mine free? And so we worked on that extremely hard this year. Very, very proud to say that in about a week, this is really remarkable. You don't see a lot of examples of this. In the course of 1 week, during a congressional recess, we got 89 U.S. representatives and 22 U.S. senators to sign a letter to the head of USAID saying you need to restore this program. 89 U.S. representatives, 22 U.S. senators, 1 week during a congressional recess when the legislators are back home and very hard to reach. So that effort has, I think, helped sustain this program. The fact that Armenians around the country weighed in, wrote letters, made phone calls, visited the legislators, it's absolutely part of our success. So the aid to Artsakh was pushed very hard through that congressional letter, but also through the amendment offered by T.J. Cox of Fresno to the foreign aid bill. He pushed and secured adoption of the T.J. Cox amendment, which of course continues funding for Artsakh in terms of what the Congress wants. Now there's a dialogue between the Congress and the administration. There are still voices, sadly, in the administration who want to cut that assistance. I'm not sure why. Maybe it's as a favor to Azerbaijan. Maybe it's some kind of misguided effort to send some signal on some geopolitical concern. But the fact of the matter is there are mines in the ground. There are children and adults and farmers and others who are injured all the time. And it's within our power, a very modest cost, just a few $1 million a year. It's within America's power to make Artsakh mine-free. We need to sustain that. So the Cox Amendment was a big victory for us this year, as was that congressional letter. The dialogue with USAID seems promising. There's still a couple of hard cases over at state who want to draw a line in the sand at the expense of children and farmers. So that's unfortunate, but that's what we face. And if that's a hand we're dealt, we'll play it and we'll push very hard with your help. Okay, that's aid to Artsakh. Second, Royce-Engel. Some of you are familiar with Royce-Engel. Some of you are not. I'll just give it a very quick outline. Some years ago, about 5-6 years ago, the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Ed Royce, and Eliot Engel, who was the ranking Democrat but is now the chairman of the committee, came together and put together a proposal, which we supported wholeheartedly, that basically said we need to strengthen the ceasefire in Artsakh. Whatever the outcome is, however the peace talks go, whatever resolution can be reached, whatever the parties agree to, nothing's going to be possible if there are people being killed on the ground by snipers and by other means at the line of contact. No peace is going to be possible. If there are funerals in Azerbaijan or funerals in Armenia, does not create the conditions for peace. We need to have peace on the ground before we can have peace at the table. So Royce and Engel came up with this plan, a 3-part plan. First, withdraw snipers, don't deploy new weaponry, don't deploy heavy arms to the line of contact. Common sense. Snipers do nothing but kill, and they don't add anything to the prospects for peace. So no snipers, no heavy weapons, no new arms. Second, add observers. The OSCE is the international mediating body for the Artsakh talks. They have a handful of observers, but there should be more. There should be dozens of observers to make sure that they know what's going on at the line of contact. If one side or the other initiates aggression, observers are one way you can know who's doing what. So more observers, that's number 2. And number 3, and maybe most significantly, is the deployment of gunfire locators. Gunfire locators are advanced sound ranging equipment, I guess they call it, that can detect when there's gunfire. It can detect where the gunfire came from, in which direction it was heading, and where it hit, things of that sort. It's very, very sophisticated stuff, relatively expensive, but highly sophisticated technology that lets a third party, in this case the OSCE, know who's initiating aggression. Now, the Armenian side is perfectly happy with this. Armenia has said they like the idea. Artsakh has said they like the idea. The OSCE has endorsed it. Our own State Department thinks it's a very constructive step toward peace. Azerbaijan has opposed it, and you have to ask yourself why. Why would Azerbaijan not want folks to know who is launching the attacks? Well, I'll give you my answer. They are starting the attacks, and they don't want people to know that. They want the plausible deniability of starting attacks and then having the observers step in and say, well, we don't know who started it, but both of you should cut it out. And that's not fair at all. It's on one hand even-handed in the sense that they blame both parties, but it's unfair because both parties are not equally to blame. Azerbaijan is the anti-status quo power, and they have an interest in rocking the boat. Artsakh and Armenia, in this case, if you look at it in terms of game theory, they're the status quo power. They wouldn't want disruptions to the status quo. So Azerbaijan clearly is starting the aggression, and just as clearly is against gunfire locators, because they know they will get called out. They will be held accountable, and they don't want that. So, but we were very happy this year that Congresswoman Chu of California, Democrat of California, offered an amendment to make that the policy of the U.S. House, and that was adopted by the U.S. House very, very handily on the floor of the House as part of an en bloc set of amendments. So we have now the Royce-Engel proposals, which were in the form of a letter, but now in the form of legislation. We're very happy to see that step taken as well. That's number 2. So we have aid, then we have Royce-Engel. Number 3 is, I'll frame it this way. There's an effort by Azerbaijan to isolate Artsakh, to somehow make Artsakh radioactive and to have it be a pariah among nations. That's obviously their approach. They have their interests for doing so. Typically, they're not very good at it, and we're extremely good at getting around their kind of like, I don't know, kind of petty and parochial attempts to do that. So one way to do that is by encouraging congressional travel to Artsakh. And we saw a few years ago, Congressman Valadao, Pallone, and Gabbard, Congressman Gabbard is running for president, travel to Artsakh. This year, we saw Congressman Pallone go again, and he was joined by Congresswoman Jackie Spear, another co-chair of the Armenian caucus, and Congresswoman Chu of California. And they travel there. And so we're seeing more and more travel to Artsakh, and we applaud their initiative and their leadership in making that trip. And Congressman Pallone has backed that up by putting in place like a legislative architecture on this issue. And he's introduced HRES 190, which we strongly support, that says that we need to remove artificial barriers to US-Artsakh travel and communication. There are, somewhere in some dusty filing cabinet at the State Department, some set of rules that say, who can and cannot go to Artsakh, who can go and oversee an aid program, who can go and monitor the front line. And it's extremely narrow. Like you probably count the number of U.S. officials who can go to Artsakh on one hand, maybe. And that's totally counterproductive. The U.S. policy should be knowing more. U.S. policy should be engaging more. U.S. policy should be talking more. The path to peace is not, pretending that, pretending Artsakh isn't there. Artsakh is there. Artsakh is a sovereign entity. It protects its borders. It's developing its economy and society in very, very promising ways. And this idea that Azerbaijan gets to tell America, well, and you can't talk to them, and that's going to lead to something good, that's just ridiculous. So that's what Congressman Pallone is pushing, HRES 190. We support that entirely. Aspects of it are, as I said, getting rid of the restrictions on U.S. Travel and communication, civil society, government, foreign aid oversight, all sorts of dialogue should take place. If there's discussion on regional health issues or water issues, well, Karabakh should be part of those talks. And it'd be foolish to exclude them for just because Azerbaijan thinks they deserve a veto on the subject. But part of 190 is also to say that Artsakh belongs at the peace table. I think in the history of peace talks, I'm not sure there's been any that didn't include the people who would have to live with the consequences of the peace talks. So you have the people of Artsakh, the citizens of Artsakh, whose status and security and every other aspect of their future depends on these negotiations, and yet they can't sit at the negotiations. That's ridiculous. So that's, again, an Azerbaijani veto. It's being enforced here in D.C., and they don't deserve that. It's actually counterproductive on so many levels. It's morally wrong, but counterproductive as well. So HRES 190 advances a whole range of pro-Artsakh initiatives, pro-peace initiatives. We back it very aggressively, very much on that. Also, in terms of Artsakh, we look at Azerbaijan's constant threats. It's sniper attacks, but also its military escalation. It's ramping up its arsenal in some very, very troubling and menacing ways. One of the threats that they've had on the table for years now is that they will shoot down any civilian aircraft that flies into the Stepanakert airport. Now, freedom of travel is a universal freedom. It's acknowledged by the United Nations. And, we, you and I, everyone listening to this has the right to travel freely and to not be restricted or hindered in our ability to move around the planet. Yet Azerbaijan has said, well, if you fly into Stepanakert airport, we will shoot you down. That's highly unprecedented. You'd be hard pressed to identify any government in the world that says that they reserve for themselves the right to shoot down civilian airliners. That's really terrible. And Congressman Sherman offered an amendment which passed the House as part of the National Defense Authorization Act, which said basically, look, Azerbaijan's making these terrible threats, and maybe one day they will act on these horrific threats, but they shouldn't do so with U.S. weapons. And if they're going to deploy anti-aircraft to kill civilians on a civilian airliner, well, those anti-aircraft weapons cannot be U.S. weapons. They should not be supplied or funded in any way by the U.S. government. That passed overwhelmingly because it's basic common sense. And we're very, very appreciative of Congressman Sherman's leadership on that as well. Other issues on the Artsakh agenda is, well, for example, Azerbaijan seeks trade benefits here in the U.S. They want to be able to export products to the United States under very favorable terms, under preferable terms or preferential terms. And one system that allows them to do that is called the Generalized System of Preferences, the GSP. Their GSP status is under review in just a couple of weeks. The U.S. Trade Representative will hold a hearing to discuss Azerbaijan's eligibility for continued preferential treatment. We have weighed in with the U.S. Trade Representative. You can follow our filing online on the USTR website by saying basically Azerbaijan has violated the rules of the GSP, the Generalized System of Preferences. They have conspired with another country to artificially obstruct trade, and that's the Turkish-Azeri blockade of Armenia. And they've also provided sanctuary to a known terrorist, in this case, Ramil Safarov, who murdered Gurgen Markaryan in his sleep during a NATO training exercise in Hungary some years ago. He was, of course, pardoned by Hungary, which was a terrible. No, he was released by Hungary to return to finish his sentence in Azerbaijan. But of course, Aliyev pardoned him, gave him a parade, promoted him, gave him back pay. He's clear case of an unrepentant axe murderer of killing someone in their sleep, treated as a war hero in Azerbaijan, and that act also violates the Generalized System of Preferences. So we've weighed in on that accord, and there's a range of others on Artsakh. I'll leave it there, but there's a range of other topics as well. Let me see if we have any things here. Okay, we're doing good. Okay, so let's move on to US-Armenia relations. Now, in the wake of the revolution in Armenia, we have pressed very aggressively to upgrade the US-Armenia relationship. The Armenian embassy here in DC has done very, very important work on that front as well. We have seen the name of the dialogue that takes place annually between the U.S. and Armenia upgraded to a strategic dialogue. Before it was something called the Economic Task Force, which was at the level of kind of like tactics, let's say. And now we see an upgrade to a strategic dialogue, which is at a higher level, where the two nations, based on shared interests, seek to advance their cooperation on mutual concerns. So we're very, very encouraged by that. I would say this: I don't think that the response from the U.S. has been everything that we might have expected, or folks in Yerevan might have expected. There's been a bit of an artificial ceiling imposed on the U.S.-Armenia relationship. I mean, geopolitics have come into play. There are folks, I think, in the administration, maybe not really in Congress, but mostly in the administration, some of the more short-sighted folks who put this ceiling on the relationship when there should be no limits on the relationship. If the United States spent 25 years basically lecturing Armenia on good governance and democracy and corruption, well, Armenia has made progress, remarkable progress on all those fronts, and yet the response is not really, really what we'd like to see. It's been good. We've seen some progress, the strategic upgrade, seen some new dialogue, a lot of important meetings. But, I think that the United States is on the right track. Armenia is on the right track. We need to keep pressing. I think there's still some room for progress here, and then we're going to realize our potential, I think, on this score in 2020. 2020 is going to be a year where I think we remove artificial barriers to the growth of U.S.-Armenia relations. One area where there's been, I think, some misunderstanding in Washington has been on Armenia's deployment of a humanitarian mission to Syria. There are some folks in D.C. who are entirely sympathetic to that. They know the history of Syria accepting Armenian refugees during the Armenian Genocide. They know that the Armenian community in Aleppo, Haleb, and elsewhere through Syria is a very, very old and important Armenian community, that this was a sign of solidarity between Armenia and the diasporan community in Syria, as well as an effort to help preserve religious diversity, plurality, tolerance, and especially protection of Christians in the Middle East. This is a U.S. stated goal. This is a U.S. policy priority that we help preserve and protect Christians in the Middle East. Armenia is doing that. They're helping a very at-risk population, Armenians and others, not just Armenians, but others as well. And they're also honoring the contributions that Syrians made, many of them Muslims who welcomed Armenians into their homes a century ago. So there's a lot of folks in DC who really get that, and it's very much appreciated. But there are some folks who don't, and they view this through a geopolitical lens, and they want to kind of draw a bright line and say this is where we're going to put down our geopolitical marker, and it's a total misread. This is humanitarian. It needs to be understood in a humanitarian sense. U.S. policy should be supportive of this deployment. U.S. policy should be helping Armenia help the Christians and other religious minorities in the Middle East survive. That's going to be good for America. It's going to be good for Armenia. It's going to be good for Syria. So, yeah, we think that there's a little bit of progress yet to be made on that front. But I think overall, the sort of balance of forces is on the right side, but there's still some holdouts, and we're working on that front as well. Along with our friends in the Hellenic American Leadership Council and in Defense of Christians, we have made some progress on U.S.-Turkey policy. We've certainly shined a spotlight, along with many others, on the danger of nuclear weapons, U.S. nuclear weapons being stored at the Incirlik Air Base. There's about 50 or so, 50, 60 U.S. nuclear weapons that are forward positioned at that air base, basically within striking distance, within the grasp of Erdogan, which is a very scary proposition. Now, we all like to think that those weapons are safe and they could not be deployed by Erdogan, but we don't know that, and they should not be there. They serve no useful purpose, but they represent a very serious risk. So we're pleased by the growing attention to that issue. We hope that the U.S. government will take action if they haven't already. Certainly, I don't think they would advertise what they're doing on that front, but we hope that one day soon the U.S. government will announce that Incirlik is a nuclear-free zone, and our U.S. weapons are no longer at risk of being seized by an angry anti-American dictator. Also on the F-35s, from day one, we partnered with the Hellenic American Leadership Council and also our friends in Defense of Christians to oppose the F-35 sale. We went against this when nobody was against it. A lot of others deserve extreme credit for their heavy lifting. You have like senators like Van Hollen and others who've done just heroic work. But I can say we've been there from day one. We put our shoulder to the wheel, and right now there's multiple pieces of legislation that ban Turkish participation in the F-35 program, and the administration itself has said that Turkey has disqualified itself, that they no longer can be part of the production of these advanced aircraft, some of the, I think, most advanced aircraft in the world, but also that they cannot, we will not sell them any of these weapons, which is a good thing. They don't need to be any more lethal than they already are. So that we're very, very pleased. And I just want to take a moment right now, sidebar a second here. Our work on the Armenian Genocide resolution and on a whole range of issues, our success, our progress in these areas has been the results of our community's efforts, certainly, but also our coalition partners. And In Defense of Christians has been with us. They're a relatively new organization, less than a decade old, but they have done some heavy lifting in Washington, D.C. We're very, very proud of our partnership with In Defense of Christians, really a remarkable group. If you don't know about them, Google them now. In Defense of Christians, check out their Facebook page. They do remarkable work. And of course, the Hellenic American Leadership Council, brothers and sisters from day one. We work very closely with them. Not a day goes by that we're not in close partnership with our friends at the Hellenic American Leadership Council. So very, very, from my heart, major thank yous to IDC and HALC. Moving on, that kind of covers a lot of the policy landscape, and there's more, and I'd be glad to answer questions if you have any. But I do want to wrap up by saying that parallel to everything that we do on the policy front, parallel to the work with the State Department, parallel to the work with the executive branch and the media and all the rest, we're constantly investing in our future. And the way we invest in our future is by empowering our youth. We take that as seriously as anything else we're doing. A day or a week or a month that goes by without major investment in youth is not a month or a week or a day well spent. We are highly invested in what's next. So if we spend 40% of the effort on an advocacy priority. There's 60% saying, well, what about next week, next month, next year? So what we do is we have these two great programs. We have our summer internship program, which is named after the great activist, the late activist, Leo Sarkisian. And those are college students who come here to DC and spend 8 weeks training on how to be effective advocates, like the nuts and bolts stuff, argumentation, technology, social media, how to handle a congressional meeting, how to handle follow-up feedback, all these kinds of things, how to prepare documents that are persuasive. We do the summer internship. That's 8 weeks every summer, Leo Sarkisian summer internship. And then the rest of the year, we have the Hovig Apos Ladedjan Capital Gateway Program, which invites young Armenians to apply. If they're interested in starting a career in Washington, D.C., they apply. If they're accepted, we give them housing at the Aramian House, named after the great family of Sue, Margot, and Martha Aramian. And we teach them how to do their resume, set up their LinkedIn account, how to do a good cover letter, how to handle an interview, how to make introductions, how to network. We handhold them through the process for about 3 months, and at the end of which almost all of them have an entry-level job that gets their career started here in Washington. And we've been very pleased that Gateway participants, fellows, have started jobs in the executive branch and in the Congress, in the House and Senate, in think tanks, consulting firms, all across the city. They're becoming very much part of the fabric of Washington, D.C., and it's a great victory for them, and they're giving back essentially to America as citizens of Armenian heritage. But it's also good for us because this adds to the Armenian presence in the capital in ways that I think hold in ways that are very meaningful for us in terms of having influence here in the city for years, even decades to come. So that's a pretty quick review of what we've been up to. I see that we don't have a lot of questions. I realize we are very, very late in the year, and this is like kind of a slow day in many offices. But please feel free to weigh in with any thoughts, comments, suggestions. If you think we've done something well, tell us that. If you think we can do things better, please share that as well. We welcome all criticism. Really look to you to be the ones that make sure we're on the right track. Make sure that we're doing what we need to do. You are our voice. You are our values, essentially. We're trying our best here in Washington to represent you to the people that run the country. So on Artsakh issues, Armenian genocide issues, US-Armenia relations issues, we want to hear from you. So please weigh in. If you think we've done a good job this year, if you'd like to say thank you, if you want to cast a vote of confidence in the ANCA, there's a link on the description field for this video. One is to the ANCA, which is our political arm, and the other is the ANCA endowment, which does charitable work. Donations to the endowment are by and large tax deductible. Donations to the ANCA are not tax deductible because they go to support political activity, advocacy, legislative priorities, supporting candidates, things of that sort. So the choice is yours, whichever you think is the way you'd like to go. We'd very, very much welcome your support. Every year, we're blessed to have families across the country, friends across America who literally make thousands and thousands of donations, typically relatively modest. I think our typical gift is around $100, but it's deeply appreciated. Every gift adds up, and we're able to have this voice in Washington because so many people do something. It has just something. It doesn't need to be huge, doesn't need to be great. It could be a $5 donation, $10 donation, whatever it is. It's your way of sustaining our work and also showing your support for our efforts in Washington. So with that, I'm going to sign off, and thank you very much. I may check in one more time before the new year, but until then, thank you.